The police called saying they found my daughter's backpack in a lake. My daughter is sitting right next to me. The detective's voice came through my phone with that particular flatness cops use when delivering terrible news. Mrs. Garrison, this is Detective Kohler with the County Sheriff's Department. We recovered a child's backpack from Crescent Lake this morning during a diving operation. The identification inside indicates it belongs to your daughter, Riley Garrison, age 8. We need you to come down to the station immediately. I was standing in my kitchen holding a spatula, making grilled cheese for lunch while Riley sat at the table coloring a picture of our cat. She'd stayed homesick from school with a stomach bug, spent the morning on the couch watching nature documentaries in her pajamas. The detective's words made no sense in the context of my daughter humming 6 feet away from me, completely alive and absorbed in choosing the right shade of orange for Pumpkin's fur. There must be a mistake, I said, watching Riley add whiskers with careful precision. My daughter is right here. She's homesick today. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I pulled the phone away to check if the call had dropped. Detective Kohler's voice returned, careful and measured in a way that made my stomach clench. Ma'am, we also recovered a body. A child, approximately 8 years old, wearing Roosevelt Elementary uniform. The backpack contains an inhaler prescribed to Riley Garrison, student ID with her photo, and several custom patches that match the description of items reported as belonging to your daughter. We need you to come identify. I hung up without letting him finish. Riley looked up from her coloring, sensing something wrong in the sudden silence. Mom, you okay? You look weird? My hands were shaking badly enough that I set down the spatula before I dropped it. A body. They'd found a child's body in the lake, and that child was carrying Riley's backpack. The backpack she'd taken to school every day for 2 years. The purple one covered in patches from different states we'd visited, with her name embroidered on the front pocket and her emergency inhaler in the side pouch. Riley had asthma, needed that inhaler accessible at all times. I made her keep it in that specific pocket, checked it every morning before school. Where's your backpack? I asked, my voice coming out strangled. Riley's face scrunched in confusion. I gave it to Sophie, remember? Like 2 weeks ago? She didn't have one and hers broke and you said it was fine if I gave her my old one since you were getting me a new one anyway? Sophie. The name meant nothing to me, which was strange because I knew all Riley's classmates. I'd been room parent for 2 years, knew every child in her class by name and face. Who's Sophie? Riley set down her crayon, looking at me like I was being deliberately dense. My friend Sophie from school. The new girl. She sits next to me at lunch and we play together at recess. She didn't have any school stuff and her backpack was all torn up, so I gave her mine. You said yes, Mom. You were making dinner and I asked if it was okay and you said sure as long as I was careful with my inhaler. I had zero memory of this conversation, but that wasn't unusual. Riley asked me dozens of questions while I cooked, and I often said yes on autopilot while concentrating on not burning things. But giving away her backpack meant some other child had been carrying Riley's identification and medication. Some other child who was now dead in a lake. The phone rang again. Detective Kohler's number. I answered with my heart hammering. Mrs. Garrison, I understand this is shocking, but we need you to come down here. If your daughter is with you, bring her. We need to establish identity and understand how her belongings ended up with the victim we recovered. His voice shifted slightly on that last part, and I heard something underneath the professional tone. Confusion, maybe? Or suspicion? They'd found a child's body carrying my daughter's identification. Of course they were suspicious. Of course they needed to see Riley alive. We'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, already moving toward Riley's room to find her real clothes. She protested leaving her coloring, protested having to get dressed when she was sick, protested the general unfairness of being dragged out when she was supposed to be resting. I let her complaints wash over me while my brain tried to process what was happening. The sheriff's station was a low brick building that always smelled like burned coffee and printer toner. Detective Kohler met us in the lobby. A tall man with graying hair and tired eyes that widened noticeably when he saw Riley walking beside me, very much alive. He crouched down to her level with practiced ease. Hi there, Riley. I'm Detective Kohler. Your mom says you've been homesick today? Riley nodded, suddenly shy in the presence of an actual detective. I threw up this morning, but I feel better now except Mom made me come here instead of letting me finish my coloring. Kohler's eyes moved from Riley's face to mine, and I watched him recalibrate his entire understanding of the situation. Mrs. Garrison, can you come with me? Riley, there's a kids area right through that door with toys and books. Officer Ray will stay with you while your mom and I talk. The conference room he led me to had a one-way mirror and the kind of furniture designed to be impossible to weaponize. On the table sat a large plastic evidence bag containing a purple backpack I recognized instantly. Patches from Oregon, Nevada, Colorado, and Montana spelled out our family vacation history. Riley's name in silver thread on the front pocket, slightly crooked because I'd embroidered it myself. The inhaler visible through the clear mesh side pocket. Everything exactly as it should be except this backpack had been underwater with a dead child. Tell me about Sophie, Kohler said, pulling out a recording device. Riley mentioned giving her backpack to a new student at school. When did this happen? I tried to remember any mention of a new friend. Came up blank. I don't know exactly. Riley said 2 weeks ago, but I don't remember the conversation. She said this girl didn't have supplies and I apparently gave permission to give away the backpack. Kohler made notes, his pen scratching across paper in quick, efficient movements. What can you tell me about this friend? Last name? Where she lives? Parents' names? Nothing. I had nothing. Riley had apparently made a friend significant enough to give away her most important possession, and I couldn't remember a single detail. The realization of my own distraction hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so wrapped up in work deadlines and household management that I'd stopped really listening when Riley talked about school. Kohler saw it on my face and his expression softened slightly. Kids make friends fast at that age. It's not unusual for parents to lose track. But we need to figure out who this child was. The body we pulled from the lake, he paused, choosing words carefully, was in the water approximately 3 days. Preliminary examination suggests a vehicle went into the lake with the child inside. We found a sedan submerged about 50 feet from where the backpack surfaced. My brain struggled to connect these pieces into something coherent. A car in the lake, a child drowned inside it. That child carrying Riley's backpack, wearing Riley's school uniform, approximately Riley's age and build. If I hadn't been home with Riley today, if she'd been at school like normal, I would have identified that body as my daughter based on the evidence. The thought made my vision blur at the edges. Who reported the backpack? I asked. Kohler flipped through his notes. Anonymous 911 call yesterday evening. Male voice said he'd seen something purple floating in the lake near the boat launch. We sent divers this morning, found the backpack tangled in branches about 10 feet down. The car and body were deeper, 40 feet, must have gone in at speed to get that far out. Driver's side window was open, which is how the backpack likely escaped. A male voice reporting the backpack. A father and daughter living in a car. Riley's words about Sophie not having school supplies suddenly took on darker meaning. Riley said Sophie's backpack was torn up, that she didn't have proper school things. What if this was a homeless family? What if Sophie's father was living out of his car with her? Kohler's pen stopped moving. That would explain some things. We haven't been able to identify the vehicle yet. No plates, VIN filed off, clearly deliberate. The body, he hesitated again. The child was secured in a seatbelt in the back seat. She didn't drown trying to escape. She drowned because someone drove that car into the lake with her strapped inside. Murder-suicide. The words hung in the air between us without being spoken. A parent so desperate or disturbed that they'd killed their own child rather than face whatever they were running from. I thought about Sophie, if that was even her real name, sitting in class next to my daughter, wearing clothes that probably weren't quite clean, using Riley's donated backpack, trying to look normal while living in a car with a father who was planning to kill them both. We need to talk to Riley's teacher, I said. She'll remember a new student even if I don't. She'll have enrollment paperwork, contact information, something. Kohler was already standing, gesturing for me to follow. I called the school before you arrived. Principal says there's no record of any new enrollment in the past month. No student named Sophie in Riley's class. No new students at all. The words landed wrong, like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong space. That's impossible. Riley's been talking about Sophie for weeks. They eat lunch together, play at recess. You can't just show up at school without enrolling. Back in the lobby, Officer Ray was reading a picture book to Riley, who looked bored but patient. Kohler crouched down again, his voice gentle. Riley, I need you to tell me more about Sophie. What does she look like? Riley perked up, always happy to talk about her friends. She looks like me, kind of. Same hair but more tangled. Same height. She has this really pretty bracelet she never takes off. Silver with a blue stone. She said her mom gave it to her before she had to go away. Kohler and I exchanged glances. Where did Sophie go away to, honey? Riley shrugged. Sophie didn't say. She just said her mom couldn't be with her anymore, but she had the bracelet to remember her. She was really sad about it, so I gave her my backpack to make her feel better, and some of my lunch because she said she forgot hers. Kohler pulled out his phone and showed Riley a photo that made my stomach drop. A silver bracelet with a turquoise stone, photographed against a white evidence sheet. Is this the bracelet? Riley nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, that's Sophie's. Did you find it? Is she okay? The detective's face remained carefully neutral. We found this bracelet on a child we're trying to identify. Riley, this is very important. When was the last time you saw Sophie at school? Riley scrunched her face in concentration. Last Friday, maybe? She wasn't there Monday, and I looked for her at recess yesterday, but she wasn't there. I thought maybe she was sick like me. 5 days. Sophie had been missing from school for 5 days, and nobody had noticed or reported it because officially, Sophie didn't exist at that school. Kohler excused himself to make phone calls, leaving me with Riley in the lobby. I pulled her close, feeling the solid warmth of her body, the realness of her breathing and fidgeting. Some other mother's daughter was dead in the county morgue, mistaken for mine because she'd been carrying Riley's backpack. Some other mother was about to get the worst phone call of her life if she didn't already know her daughter was gone. Riley squirmed away from my hug. Mom, you're squishing me. What's going on? Why are we here? I couldn't tell her the truth. Couldn't explain that her friend was dead, that the backpack she'd given away had marked a child for identification in a drowning. The police just needed to ask some questions about your friend Sophie. It's okay, baby. Everything's okay. But nothing was okay. And the way Kohler's face looked when he returned made it clear things were about to get worse. Mrs. Garrison, we need to go to the school. The principal is gathering Riley's teacher and the lunch monitors to discuss this Sophie situation. Something doesn't add up. We drove in separate cars, Riley chattering in the backseat about missing afternoon cartoons, oblivious to the tension radiating off me in waves. Roosevelt Elementary looked exactly as it did every morning when I dropped Riley off, cheerful and normal with playground equipment and student art in the windows. Principal Vance met us at the door, a short woman with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she did not appreciate having her school day disrupted by police. Detective, I've pulled Mrs. Fletcher from Riley's class and our 2 lunch monitors. Nobody has any recollection of a new student named Sophie, and our enrollment records show no new students since August. Mrs. Fletcher was Riley's 3rd grade teacher, a young woman who'd taught for only 2 years, but genuinely loved her students. She looked confused and slightly defensive when we gathered in the conference room. I'm certain I would remember a new student in my class. We have 23 students, and I know all of them. Kohler pulled out a notepad. Riley describes a girl her age, similar appearance, who sits next to her at lunch and plays with her at recess. Says this has been going on for at least 2 weeks. Mrs. Fletcher's confusion deepened. Riley sits with Aisha and Melody at lunch. She's been sitting with them all year. And at recess, she usually plays Foursquare with a group that includes those same girls plus a few others. I've never seen her with anyone who matches that description. Riley was standing beside me, and I felt her stiffen at the teacher's words. But Sophie was there, she insisted, her voice rising with 8-year-old indignation. She sat at my table and we shared my lunch and we played together and she was real. Mrs. Fletcher's face softened with understanding, the kind adults get when they think a child is confused or lying. Honey, sometimes kids have imaginary friends. That's okay. But we need to be honest with the detective. Riley's face flushed red and tears started streaming. She wasn't imaginary. She was real. I gave her my backpack and my lunch and she told me about her mom and she was real. The volume of her distress echoed in the small conference room, and I pulled her against me while she sobbed into my shirt. Over her head, I saw Kohler and Principal Vance exchanging looks that clearly communicated their belief that Riley had invented this friend, that there was no Sophie, that somehow my daughter's backpack had ended up with an unidentified dead child through means we hadn't yet determined. But Riley didn't have imaginary friends. Never had. She was a concrete, literal child who took things at face value and got frustrated with pretend games. And she'd described that bracelet perfectly before seeing the photo. She'd known about Sophie's mother being gone. These weren't details an 8-year-old would invent casually. Someone else must have seen her, I said desperately. If Riley was sharing lunch with another child for 2 weeks, other students would have noticed. Other teachers during recess duty. Principal Vance's expression suggested this was a waste of everyone's time, but Kohler nodded. Let's talk to Riley's lunch group and the other recess monitors. It took 30 minutes to gather the students Vance released, Aisha and Melody from Riley's class, who were thrilled to miss math for mysterious police questions. Kohler showed them patience I wouldn't have managed, getting down to their level and asking about lunch seating. Both girls confirmed Riley sat with them every day. Does Riley ever share her lunch with anyone else? Kohler asked. Aisha nodded immediately. Yeah, she gives food to the lake girl sometimes. Every adult in the room went still. The lake girl? Aisha looked surprised that this was news. The girl who lives by the lake. She doesn't go to our school, but she's there sometimes. She walks through the playground during recess, and Riley gives her part of her lunch through the fence. Melody jumped in, excited to contribute. She's really quiet. She never talks to us, just to Riley. And she's always dirty like she's been playing outside all day. One time I asked Riley why she was giving away her food, and Riley said the lake girl doesn't have much. Kohler's entire energy shifted, his questions becoming more focused and urgent. How often does this lake girl show up? The two 8-year-olds discussed it between themselves, counting on their fingers. Maybe like 3 or 4 times a week? She's not there every day. And only at lunch recess. Never morning recess. What does she look like? Melody and Aisha looked at each other, then at Riley, who'd stopped crying and was watching the conversation with a mixture of vindication and continued distress. Like Riley, but messier, Aisha finally said. Same brown hair, but longer and all naughty. Same size. She wears the same shirt a lot, the blue one with flowers. And she has that pretty bracelet. The bracelet again. Multiple witnesses confirming its existence, confirming Sophie's existence, confirming Riley hadn't invented this friend, but also confirming Sophie had never actually been inside the school. Principal Vance's face had gone pale. You're telling me an unidentified child has been accessing our playground during school hours for weeks and nobody reported this? Her voice climbed toward panic. How is that possible? We have fence protocols, visitor sign-in, background checks. Kohler cut her off. The playground backs up to Crescent Lake property. If someone was living in the woods back there, they could approach the fence without going through the main entrance, especially a child who knew when to time it with lunch recess. He turned to the students. Did you ever see the lake girl with an adult? Her father or mother? Both girls shook their heads. She was always by herself. That's why Riley started giving her food, because she looked hungry and sad. Riley found her voice again, still shaky from crying. She said her dad was sleeping during the day because he worked at night. She said she wasn't supposed to leave the car, but she got bored and knew the school had food. I didn't think it was weird because she seemed nice and she needed help. Out of the mouths of children came the most devastating truth, that a homeless child had been living in the woods behind the school, approaching the fence at lunch for handouts, and none of the adults had noticed or intervened. That child was now dead in a morgue, drowned in a car her father drove into the lake, wearing a school uniform she'd never been enrolled to wear, carrying a backpack that had led police to the wrong family. I felt sick with the enormity of the failure, not just mine in not paying attention, but the systemic failure that let a child fall through every crack designed to catch them. Kohler was already on his phone, calling for additional units to search the woods behind the school. Within 20 minutes, the parking lot filled with police vehicles and officers spread into the tree line with search dogs. Riley sat with Mrs. Fletcher in the classroom, drawing pictures while teachers tried to maintain normal instruction despite the chaos outside. I stood with Principal Vance and Kohler at the fence line, watching officers disappear into the dense growth between the playground and the lake. How did nobody see her? Vance kept repeating, more to herself than to us. How did this child slip through? Kohler's response was gentle but firm. Because you were looking for threats from adults, not from hungry children. Because she was quiet and didn't draw attention. Because the system assumes children are either enrolled in school or being homeschooled, and doesn't account for the ones living in cars with parents too desperate to follow normal procedures. The search took less than an hour to find what they were looking for. A campsite maybe 300 yards into the woods, just far enough from the school to be hidden but close enough to walk easily. The site contained a makeshift shelter built from a tarp and fallen branches, a small pile of clothes, food wrappers indicating meals scavenged from gas station dumpsters, and a spiral notebook filled with a child's handwriting. Kohler brought the notebook back in an evidence bag, his face grim. She was keeping a journal, writing to her mother. He opened to a random page and I read over his shoulder. Riley's description of Sophie becoming devastatingly real in looping third-grade handwriting. Dear Mom, I miss you so much. Dad says you're not coming back, but I know you would if you could. Today I made a friend at the school. Her name is Riley, and she gave me part of her sandwich. She's really nice. I wish I could go to school like her. Page after page of a child's loneliness and hunger, documenting days spent alone while her father apparently worked night shifts somewhere, describing the friend she'd made through the fence, talking about the bracelet her mother had given her and how she wore it always to remember. The last entry was dated 5 days ago. Dad says we have to leave tonight. He says people are looking for us and it's not safe anymore. I don't want to go. I like it here and Riley is my friend. But Dad is scared and acting weird. I hope wherever we go has nice people like Riley. Kohler closed the notebook carefully. Her father panicked, thought someone was onto them, decided to run. And when running became impossible, he chose murder-suicide over whatever he was afraid of facing. We need to identify them, I said, my voice rough with barely contained emotion. That child deserves her name. Her mother deserves to know what happened. Kohler nodded. The bracelet is our best lead. It's distinctive enough that if we get it in front of the right people, someone will recognize it. The vehicle VIN was filed off, but we're running paint samples and manufacturer details. The father's prints should be in the system if he had any kind of record. I thought about Riley's description of Sophie saying her mother had to go away. Not died, not left, went away. What if the mother's in prison? What if that's why Sophie's father had custody? And why he was running? Maybe the custody wasn't legal. Maybe he violated an agreement. Maybe he was afraid of losing her to the system. Kohler pulled out his phone and started making calls, this time to social services and family courts. While he worked connections, I returned to Riley's classroom where my daughter had progressed from drawing to helping Mrs. Fletcher organize books. She looked up when I entered, her face hopeful. Did they find Sophie? Is she okay? The lie died on my lips. I knelt down to her level, taking her hands in mine. Baby, Sophie is gone. She was in an accident and she didn't survive. I'm so sorry. Riley's face crumpled and she started crying again, this time with the full body sobs of real grief. It's not fair. She was my friend and she needed help and nobody helped her enough. She wasn't wrong. Nobody had helped Sophie enough. Not the school that didn't notice her. Not the social services that lost track of her. Not the father who chose death over life. Not the mother who wasn't there for reasons we still didn't understand. And not me, who'd been so distracted with work and routines that I'd missed my own daughter befriending a homeless child through a fence. By evening, they had an identification. Sophie's real name was Claire Whitmore, age 8, last seen with her father Daniel Whitmore 6 months ago, when he'd taken her from a supervised visitation and disappeared. Her mother, Angela Whitmore, was serving 18 months at a women's correctional facility for embezzlement, desperate measures to pay for her daughter's medical bills after their insurance denied coverage for a necessary treatment. Daniel had been awarded temporary custody during Angela's incarceration, but had violated the terms by disappearing with Claire rather than allowing state supervision of her care. A warrant had been issued, but resources for tracking down parental abductions were limited, and Daniel had been careful to stay off-grid, until he'd driven his car into Crescent Lake with his daughter strapped in the backseat, ending both their lives rather than face the consequences of his actions. Detective Kohler arranged for me to be present when they notified Angela Whitmore. The prison visiting room was institutional and depressing, all concrete and metal furniture bolted to the floor. Angela was brought in wearing orange jumpsuit, her face already showing the strain of incarceration, but lighting up with desperate hope when she saw Kohler's badge. Did you find her? Is Claire okay? Kohler delivered the news with as much compassion as possible for such devastating information, but there was no gentle way to tell a mother her child was dead. Angela's reaction was primal, a scream that came from somewhere deep and wounded, the sound of a mother's heart breaking in real time. She collapsed forward, forehead hitting the metal table, and guards moved in to steady her while she sobbed. I sat there witnessing her anguish. This woman who'd committed a crime to save her daughter's life only to lose her anyway to the man she'd trusted to keep her safe. When Angela could finally speak, her voice was barely a whisper. How? Kohler explained about the car in the lake, about the apparent murder-suicide, about Claire living in the woods behind a school for weeks before Daniel took her life. Angela's hands clenched into fists. He called me 2 weeks ago, said people were asking questions about Claire, said he thought social services was getting close to finding them. I begged him to turn himself in, to do the right thing for her. He said he'd rather die than let them take her from him. Her voice broke again. I thought he was being dramatic. I thought he'd calm down. I never imagined... She couldn't finish the sentence, the reality too horrific to speak aloud. Her daughter had died because her father's fear of consequences outweighed his love for her life. That was the unbearable truth Angela would carry forever. There's something else, Kohler said gently. He explained about Riley, about the friendship through the fence, about the shared lunches and the donated backpack, about how Claire had kept a journal writing to her mother, had made a friend who'd tried to help in the small ways a child could. Angela's face transformed, grief mixing with something almost like gratitude. She wasn't alone at the end. She had a friend. She looked at me directly. Would it be possible to meet your daughter? To thank her for being kind to Claire when nobody else was? I nodded. my own throat too tight for words. It seemed the least I could do to bridge these two mothers, one grieving and one grateful beyond measure that her child had been spared. We arranged the meeting for 2 weeks later, after Claire's body was released and Angela was granted leave to attend a small funeral. Riley had struggled with nightmares about Sophie Claire, with guilt that she hadn't done more, hadn't told adults sooner, hadn't somehow prevented the tragedy. I'd explained over and over that she'd done exactly what a good person does, shown kindness to someone in need, shared what she had, offered friendship without judgment. She'd done more than the systems designed to protect children, more than the school officials paid to notice them, more than any adult who'd walked past Claire in the woods without seeing her. At 8 years old, Riley had recognized another child's humanity and responded with compassion. That was something to be proud of, even in the face of overwhelming sadness. The funeral was small, attended by Angela in handcuffs with 2 guards, a handful of social workers who'd failed Claire, and me with Riley. We stood in the cemetery under gray skies while a chaplain said words about loss and mercy that felt inadequate for the magnitude of this failure. Angela was permitted to approach Claire's casket, to place her hand on the wood and say goodbye to the daughter she'd never see grow up. Then she turned to Riley, dropping to her knees despite the handcuffs and guards. "Thank you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for seeing my baby. Thank you for being her friend. Thank you for making her feel less alone." Riley stepped forward and hugged this stranger mother, this woman in chains who'd lost everything, and they cried together for the girl they'd both loved. After the funeral, Kohler pulled me aside. We found the forged documents Daniel used. He'd created an entire false identity for Claire, enrolled her as a student at 3 different schools under fake names over the past 6 months, always withdrew her before staying long enough to raise suspicions. That's why she knew school routines, why she was wearing a Roosevelt Elementary uniform, even though she'd never been officially enrolled. Daniel had obtained the uniform somehow, had Claire dress as a student to blend in during their daytime hiding. She'd been enrolled under a false name at the school 2 districts over just 3 weeks before he pulled her out. The paper trail shows a pattern of moving every few weeks, staying ahead of social services. The level of planning made it clear this hadn't been impulsive. Daniel had been systematically evading detection, while slowly spiraling toward the decision to end both their lives. The fake identity listing my address had been part of that deception, a randomly chosen house number in the right school district to make enrollment paperwork seem legitimate. I'd been pulled into this tragedy by pure chance, my address selected from a map by a desperate man trying to hide his kidnapped daughter. The aftermath dragged through legal proceedings and investigations. The school district faced scrutiny for their failure to notice an unidentified child accessing the playground. New protocols were implemented: additional fencing, staff training on signs of homeless families, better coordination with social services. The lunch monitors who'd seen Claire but assumed she was enrolled somewhere received counseling and retraining. Principal Vance retired early, unable to reconcile her failure to protect a child who'd been feet from her building. Mrs. Fletcher started a program bringing extra food to the fence line every day, just in case another hungry child appeared, determined not to miss the next Claire Whitmore. These changes felt simultaneously important and devastatingly late, reforms written in a dead child's blood. Angela Whitmore's case gained attention from advocacy groups after Claire's death. Her embezzlement had been done to pay for experimental treatment for Claire's juvenile arthritis, treatment their insurance refused to cover despite doctor recommendations. The treatment had worked, giving Claire years of mobility she wouldn't have had otherwise, but the crime had cost Angela her freedom, and ultimately, her daughter's life. The judge reduced her remaining sentence, acknowledging the impossible position she'd been put in by a medical system that prioritized profit over a child's quality of life. She was released after serving 10 months total, emerging into a world without her daughter, carrying guilt for choices made out of desperate love. Riley and I attended Angela's release, waiting outside the prison gates with a care package and contact information. Angela looked smaller somehow, worn down by grief and incarceration, but her eyes held something like determination. "I'm going to finish my sentence working with families facing medical debt," she said. "Make sure other parents don't have to choose between their child's health and following the law. Make sure other children don't end up living in cars because the system failed them." She hugged Riley again, this embrace lasting longer, communicating gratitude and sorrow and the shared bond of loving Claire. "She would have liked being your friend," Angela whispered. "She would have liked having someone who saw her when everyone else looked away." 6 months later, Riley's school dedicated a bench near the playground fence in Claire's memory. Angela and I stood together for the ceremony, watching children play where Claire had once approached hungry and alone. The plaque read, "Claire Whitmore, may we always see the children who need us." It was inadequate but necessary, a reminder carved in metal that vigilance required more than policies and protocols. It required actually looking, actually seeing, actually caring when a child appeared who didn't quite fit the expected patterns. The bench sat empty now, but I knew Riley would sit there sometimes, remembering her friend, honoring the girl she'd shared her lunch with through a chain-link fence. And maybe that was enough, that Claire was remembered, that her life had mattered to someone, that one 8-year-old girl had recognized her humanity when the adult world failed to. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.